Hey guys, so I've had many requests to talk about my solar power system, and I've been putting it off because it's kind of a complicated topic and I wanted to be fully prepared to do it. So I think I'm ready, so let's get to it. So we're going to go through this in some kind of order from one end to the other, starting with the solar panels and then kind of going through the system right to the loads at the other end. And what you can see here is I've got 10 panels up there, and they're wired kind of in odd fashion. Originally I had them wired in one long series, so all 10 panels in one series. But the inverter I had which is a beautiful 2,000 watt inverter, wouldn't work for the situation. It was supposed to, and then I called SMA, and they said, nope, that's not going to work. It's a grid tie inverter, and this is an off-grid system. So I had to do things a little bit differently. Anyway, we're talking about the panels right now. So, and in fact, one of the panels is no longer even being used. The one on the far right there isn't in the loop. It's just sitting there, not connected to anything. But I'll explain why in a bit. But first, I want to show you a little bit more about how they're mounted. So I'm gonna have to pull out the ladder, and we're gonna have to get up there. So stick with me. Now, very important, when you're installing panels on a rooftop, get a professional to do it. All these leg bolts are going through the metal roof, and they're going into the slats, the purlins that are going across the roof. And whenever you're making holes in your roof, you don't joke around. Get it professionally installed. I have experience installing solar panels. I've been on many roofs, but I still have my buddy come and do this for me. He's a professional installer. He does this every day. He's done it every day for years now. I said, oh, that and the fact that this roof scares the hell out of me. It was very slippery. You get up there and geez, I just couldn't do it. Anyway, you'll notice that all the cables are tied up nicely. You don't want anything obstructing leaves or pine needles coming through, or even snow sliding off the roof. You want that nice and clear. And also, when the panels get up, they're not as efficient as if they're cooler. So you like a nice big airspace in there as well for airflow. I personally like solar panels on a rooftop as opposed to a ground mount. I mean, this gets them out of the way. You don't have to worry about them. The only difficulty is, if you expect any power in the winter time, you got to clear them. You got to clear the snow off of them. So that's the panel over there that's not in use. Oh, there's a little hornet's nest developing under there. That's not usually a problem. And the cables are tied up onto the rail. I really should use that panel for something. So all the wiring, I'll explain how these panels are wired. Just note right now that all the wiring is going over to that far corner, and you can just sort of see the duct going over the edge of the roof, and that's to protect the cables from going around. You can also use a boot. Put a boot, kind of like what's on the chimney there. That's a boot, and the cables go through the boot and into the attic, and then you take them where you want. I don't know why I decided not to use a boot and to go around like that, but anyway, that's what I've done. So the other thing a professional solar panel installer will make sure of is that your panels are nice and flat right across, and that they line up nicely. And that's important because you want it to look nice from the ground. And if it's not flat, you'll know. And the funny thing about rooftops, especially shingle roofs, you don't notice this nearly as much in metal roofs, but shingle roofs, no shingle roof is flat. It does this wavy thing all the way across. It's far from perfect. So if you just kind of space these leg bolts the same all the way across on a shingle roof, your panels will do the same thing. It looks awful. So my panels are made by Sharp. In fact, Sharp doesn't make panels anymore, but they stand by their warranties, and the warranties are really good. It's a 25-year performance warranty. They have to be performing at least 80% efficiency at year 25, so it's really good. But as I said, they don't make them anymore. These days you can pick up a 255 watt panel, like a Hanwha or something like that, for a little less than $1 a watt. And that's how you price panels. It's per watt, these big ones anyway. These are 60 cell panels. $1 a watt. You might get a 255 watt panel for $200 or so. Anyway, don't quote me on that. I'm not up on current pricing. I have a general idea. So I have 9 panels, and I'm pretty sure they're 240 watts. I can look that up. That might be 235 or 245, but 240 times 9 is, yeah. So 2,160 watts, a little more than 2 kilowatts of power, which is a lot for a little cabin like this. Anyway, let's look at other stuff. All right, so I'm going to use some fancy computer graphics skills to show you how these panels were wired. Originally, they were wired something like this. Now, with a panel, you get a positive and a negative. It's DC. It's pretty straightforward. So I had something like this. There to there to there to there. Yep. There. Whoa. Boom. Bang. Boot. There. So it was one long circuit, one series of panels. And with that series of panels, you're going to get, you know, 2160, potential of 2160 watts going through there. But the voltage, so there's a potential of, let's say each panel is approximately a potential of 30 volts and something like that, 30 volts and 8 amps. So yeah, about 240 watts. And for all of you who aren't sure of the math, there's only one equation you need to know. Watts equals volts times amps. And that's pretty consistent. So 30 volts at 8 amps gives you 240 watts, but the potential is, you know, with 10 panels, that I could have 300 volts going through here and into my inverter. Now my first inverter could handle that, but since I had to replace my inverter, then we started looking at prices and things like that. So what we decided to do is wire this a little differently. And I had to get my friend to come back, graciously, and wire this into 3 strings. So it looks something like this. Make that line a little, this is just the divider between these two. So a line would come in like this, to that, and then to that, and then to that, and then out, and there's 1 string. And then the other ones were just the same. 2 strings and 3 strings, just like that. And this one we had to leave out. You can't, when you do 3 strings like that, you can't have my roof heating up. You can't have like 1 string has more panels on the other string. So instead of a potential of 300 volts on this side, now we have a potential of 3 times 30, so 90 volts, 90 volts, 90 volts, 90 volts. And when you do this, so what happens is you can have 300 volts at 8 amps, but when you do it like this, now you've got 90 volts at 8 amps, 90 volts at 8 amps, 90 volts at 8 amps. So this side of the system now has 90 volts and 3/8, 24 amps, whereas this one has 300 volts and 8 amps. So that should work out to be the same wattage all in all, right? 300 times 8. Which is 2400. 2160. Oh, yeah, so it's not quite the same. So this one, well, this one is a potential of 2400 watts. This one is a potential of 2160 watts because now we don't have that panel there. So why did we have to go from 1 string, 300 volts and 8 amps, to 3 strings of 90 volts and 24 amps each? Well, the more you have to change a voltage from one level to another, the more expensive it gets. So my battery bank is 48 volts. So going from 300 volts to 48 volts is a much bigger transformer, and it just means more expensive. But going from 90 volts to 48 volts is much easier. It's a much smaller transformer. And so you have a much smaller charge controller that you need. So that's pretty much it. So I spent $600 on a charge controller instead of, you know, $2,000 on a charge controller. Okay, we're up in the loft area of my cabin. Now you remember that I said that the panels, all the wiring was coming off this corner through the duct, coming through right here, this hole in the wall, and into this box. So there's three sets of cables coming in, one for each string, and then there's the ground wire. The ground wire is actually connected to all the panels and all the rails up there, and they get combined in here. So we've got three coming in through these circuit breakers, and one set of wires coming out and going down to the charge controller. Now it is important that you get the right size of cable when you're doing this. You don't want, the higher the gauge, the thinner the wire, and it can't hold voltage as well. And which is another good reason to go from 300 volts down to 90 volts. But you want the right size of cable, and this feels like 8 gauge here. 8 gauge, possibly 10 gauge, I don't remember. It'll say on the wire, but I can't read it. Let's just say 8 gauge, but if you're unsure, talk to an electrician or talk to a solar power installer. Make sure you get that right. If you get the wrong size of cable, it's too small, you will feel it heat up, and that's not good. And when it heats up, of course, that's a lot of resistance, and you're not getting your full power through to the other end. And these cables are all nice and cool. There's no heat there at all on anything here. So the alternative would have been to put this combiner down with the other equipment outside, but it's far better to run just 2 wires down there than 6 wires. That makes sense, right? So that's why it's here. And it was a shorter cable run to bring the wires inside here and then shoot down across through the trusses and then down the wall. So the shorter the cable run, the less voltage loss you get. So it's important to remember that when you're in series, you're going to add the voltages together, and when you're in parallel, you're going to add the amperages together. In this system, we've got a combination of panels in series and then strings in parallel. So we do both. We add the voltages and then we add the amperages together. Always remembering that watts is voltage times amps. If you remember that equation, you're 90% there. So here you can see I've got the 2 wires coming down from the combiner box, and what we've got a potential of 90 volts and 24 amps coming through here, although I rarely actually see that here, and there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, it's not as sunny as it could be, I'm getting shading from trees, or it's warm out and the panels aren't as efficient as they could be, right? So anyway, I've got the 2 wires coming down into my charge controller. I've got my ground cable also going to my charge controller, and the ground cable kind of hits everything. It hits the charge controller, it hits my my breaker here, it hits the inverter, it hits the panel inside the house, and then it goes out, goes to a grounding plate. It's a great big copper plate. It gets buried in the ground 2 feet, or whatever your local code is. So now your charge controller is important. It does a really important job. It monitors your batteries. It puts out the proper voltage and amperage for your batteries. This one is kind of a nice one. It's an MPPT. It's a multi-point tracking charge controller, and it kind of, it's difficult to explain, but even now I've got 95 volts coming in, 3.6 amps, and it changes it to 54.4 volts and 6.1 while I'm at floating right now. So it'll tell you whether you're in bulk mode or absorption mode or floating mode. And those modes are important as well because batteries are finicky. They don't like to be charged too fast, or, well, you can't charge a battery too slow. I mean, you can if you're hoping to use it, but so there are 2 main types of batteries. One is AGM and the other is lead acid, and I'll get into those in a bit. I'll show you my batteries. But for a lead acid battery, and the AGMs are pretty much the same, they never want to be depleted more than 50%. If you deplete them more than 50% power, then they actually get damaged. So a good inverter will cut off at the 50% mark, or if you're using your charge controller for your power, it'll cut off at 50% as well, and which is a good thing. So because you don't want to damage your batteries. Between 50% and I believe it's 80%. It'll charge in bulk mode, so all the power it's getting in from the panels is going right into the batteries. From 80% up to 100%, it goes into absorption mode, and it's a much slower charge. It's kind of like a trickle charge, which is why solar panels are perfect for this, and why you would never use a generator to charge your batteries above 80%, because most of that power is just being lost. So yeah, so absorption is much slower. It's like a trickle charge. It's healthy for the batteries above 80%, and then when it reaches 100%, it just goes into floating mode. And floating is kind of like, I'm still using a little bit of power. It's still, you know, there's a little trickle of charge going into the batteries. You know, just kind of maintaining that 100% nicely. This charge controller is also nice because it has it maintains a data log. You can see at the end of the day, you know, how much power you've produced from your panels. And it has days worth of backlogs, and I don't know how many days. I don't even use that. It's been working so well. It also does something nice called a equalization, which is a good thing to do to your batteries every once in a while. It helps clean the plates off. So I believe I said earlier this is around 600 bucks. This charge controller. It's been pretty good. The only thing I don't like about it is every now and then the fan comes on. It's quite noisy, but not that often. Okay, so I'm going to show you my batteries in a second here, but first my inverter. So the charge controller is charging the batteries. We've got power going into the batteries, and now power is coming out through my inverter and into my loads. Now this is way fancier, this inverter, than you would ever need. This is a Sunny Island 5000, well 5048, and I bought it way back when I first had the system installed on our own old house, and there were reasons for it at the time, but I'm not going to get into. I can't use it. It can also function as a charge controller, but the only input it takes is 120 volts AC, which obviously I don't have here. I have it's all DC up to this point. So what I can use it for, though, which is kind of nice, is I've got an extension cord here, and I've plugged it into my generator. And in the wintertime, I used this a few times when my batteries were really low and I needed the power. And I just start up the generator, and this functions just as well as this other charge controller to charge the batteries. So it works really well that way. But otherwise, if I had to buy another inverter to take, you know, 48 volts a DC battery and, you know, change it to 120 volts AC, I would not buy this. I'd buy something a lot cheaper. Probably, I would guess that Outback has another inverter that would work really well for that situation. So I had to look it up. This thing is about 3,500 bucks. In fact, I'm not even sure if they're available anymore, but do not spend that kind of money on an inverter. You don't need it. I like this. What you hear right now is the most noise it makes. It's a hum. There's no fans that come on when it gets hot. And it is a 5,000 watt inverter. 5,000 watts, that's a lot of energy. That's more energy than, you know, I need in here. I can run a toaster, I can run a microwave, I can run my miter saw, my DeWalt miter saw. It's funny, when I had the DeWalt miter saw plugged into my generator, the generator was dying. It's only 3,500 watt generator, and it was just like funny. Every now and then a beaver goes by with a bunch of grass in its mouth, and it looks like some freaky alien. So this is my bank of batteries. There's 8 batteries here. They are Rolls Surrette. They recently, well, they changed their name either from Rolls to Surrette or Surrette to Rolls. I don't remember. They are 600 amp hour batteries each. Each battery is 6 volts. So 6 volts, 600 amp hours at 6 volts. And we put them all together, and now we've got, in series, and now we've got 48 volts at 600 amp hours. Why a 48 volt system? I don't remember what the decision was for that. But you can get them in all, you know, it kind of depends. When you talk to your solar power professional, you're going to come up with a solution on what you should go with. This is, again, is way overpowered for this tiny little cabin, but what the heck, I had it anyway. You do want to take note of the temperature. This says it's up around 30. More important for the winter time when it's really cold. You don't want the temperature to get too low in here. In fact, I have a heating mat on the side that's probably not really appropriate. It's for growing plants. Let's see. So all these are connected. Really heavy gauge wire. I think this looks like 4 gauge between the batteries. And then I've got 6 gauge, this black and this red, going into my inverter. I really should get like a remote temperature sensor. I don't want to be opening this up in the wintertime to see what the battery temperature is. There's another temperature sensor here, which is going to the inverter. That's probably not helping much, but I really need, because the charge controller should know what the temperature is as well, because it's important. Now these batteries, again, this was a while ago when I bought these. These will probably run you something like $350 each. They're expensive. If you go with the AGM kinds, the sealed batteries, they're nice because they're no maintenance, but they're more expensive. And I don't know how much more expensive. The maintenance involved in these, and you know me, I admit my mistakes, but I'll show you here in a second, but you have to open these up and check the water levels at least once a month. And they should be, you know, near, not up to the top of this, but up to the top of the, well, you can't see, but up to the top of where you can see inside. And there's 3 separate chambers on each battery. You got to check each of them. This is something I didn't know when I first got my batteries. I thought they spilled over from one chamber to the other, and I was only checking one along. And when they're low, you top it up with distilled water. So when I realized my mistake and I checked all the holes, I found several of the chambers actually bone dry, and that's not good for a battery. That'll damage it. So all my batteries are damaged to a certain extent, but since the system is way overpowered, it's still fine. So the other thing you need to do at least once a month is you take a hygrometer, and I don't have my hygrometer here. I can't find it. It's in the mess in there. But it's a squeeze ball with a little dial on it. You squeeze some water out, you check where the dial reads, and then you write down in each chamber, you know, what the state of charge is, or specific gravity, excuse me. And then you kind of gauge it over time. You start a spreadsheet and you gauge it, and that'll tell you, you know, if you're at full, if your charge controller is telling you it's in float mode, and you're seeing changes in the specific gravity of a certain battery, you know that. You know, you'll know that it's something's wrong, right? What else can I tell you? These things are heavy. When they've got water in them, they're about 150 pounds each. Really, really heavy. Boy, you should have seen me trying to lift these up here. What a mess. You have to have a battery box for your batteries, and they produce hydrogen gas. So if you have your batteries inside, you have to vent them to outside. That's one of the reasons why I have them out here. Oh, I see. Yeah, I made a bit of a mistake here. So these 2 cables coming in, these are from my charge controller. Now my charge controller, never a lot of voltage coming through here at any one time. I mean, right now it's 54 volts, and it's gauged to whatever the voltage of the batteries are, like whatever current state they're in. So if the batteries are at, say, 50 volts, then it's putting in, you know, 51 volts kind of thing. It gauges what it should be. So not a lot of power coming in. 50 volts at, I think the most I've ever seen is like 50 volts and 20 amps, so about 1,000 watts, which is why I've only got, I think this is a 6-gauge wire on here. Now going to the inverter, on the other hand, is a different story, because I could have up to 5,000 watts going out of this inverter, which is why we've got 4-gauge wire coming off here. 4-gauge positive and then 4-gauge negative down here. So, as I said, a lot of power could be going out at once, and you want those cables sized appropriately. Okay, so we've got power coming from the panels, through the combiner, to the charge controller, through the breaker, into the batteries, and now from the batteries to the inverter. Where does it go from here? Well, it's pretty simple. It goes inside. So let's head in. Okay, so essentially the power is coming in right here to this panel, and this panel is very similar to what you'd find in your own house. I've got power coming in and I've got power going out. So I've got power coming into each of these circuit breakers, and then each of these circuit breakers is going somewhere in the cab, and I've got one circuit for stuff going this way, you know, and really it's just going out to like light switches and electrical outlets. So really I put a box in, and then we've got a light switch or an outlet, and I just wire it up, positive, negative, negative, positive, however it's supposed to be, you know, like this, and that's pretty much it. And and you should, if you're not sure what you're doing, get an electrician to help you, or at least to advise you, because there are a lot of things that people don't know. Like when you've got high power items, say you're wiring a stove or something like that, you got to be careful how you do it. There's a lot of power going through there, and even in your kitchen, like certain sockets in your kitchen are on, like this might go to one breaker and this might go to another breaker. So you've got a potential, so each one is 120 volts, but you've got a potential of 240 volts between them. And that's so that you can plug in your toaster and your coffee maker or your microwave, and you don't blow a circuit every time you have them both on. So very important. And that's pretty much it. So you can see that I've actually got 5 breakers in use, and everything in here is pretty low voltage except for the stuff in the kitchen. So I'm not too worried about putting lots of stuff on one circuit, and even like my kitchen lights are 9 watts each, so I'm not using a whole lot of power. But I am kind of thinking, well, stuff in this area of the room should be on one breaker, and stuff over there should be another breaker, and outside stuff should be another breaker. Really, but talk to an electrician. I am not an electrician. I know enough to be dangerous. And just in case you're curious, you can see that I've been running some wire in here and around. I'm just running the wire from now. I'm going to fill in with the boxes later and whatever I'm using them for. I'm going to have a bunch of light switches here for various things. I'm going to have another outlet come down here. I haven't put the wire in. And then, from this light switch, I want to be able to control lights outside the cabin on that side. So there's, wires going there and over there. And so this is the sort of stuff I've been working on, on rainy days kind of thing, inside projects. But I've got a lot still to do. So after all that, you're probably asking yourself, well, what kind of power has he actually got there? Like, what is this capable of? And it's a good question, but it's a question that's hard to answer. The panels, the panels will put out different power at different times of the day, depending on many factors, like how warm it is, if there's shading, the direction of the sun hitting the panels. If it was sunny all day, my power curve looks like this, a nice kind of a sine wave. And I'm pointing directly south here, which is nice as well. But in my experience, I would typically get about a kilowatt hour a day per panel on average. So 9 panels, it's about 9 kilowatt hours a day. And that's just a rough estimate, and every day is going to be different. So approximately 9 kilowatt hours of power is going into my batteries in a day, as long as I'm not using 9 kilowatt hours worth of stuff in the cabin, and I'm not. At most I'm running, my computer and not much else. I run my microwave for a few minutes, that sort of thing, the coffee maker, the toaster, but only for a few minutes at a time. So 9 kilowatt hours is quite a lot for a cabin like this. I mean, my fridge all day, like in 24 hours, might use a kilowatt hour. If I left my computer on all day, it might use a couple of kilowatt hours, that sort of thing. So while my panels have a potential of 2,160 watts, a little over 2 kilowatts, I've never actually seen 2 kilowatts going through my charge controller. At most, about 1,200 watts, 1,300 watts. And as I said, many reasons for it. My batteries, I think I said earlier, they're each 600 amp hour batteries, and they're 6 volts each. So since there's 8 of them, there's 48. It's running 48 volts, 600 amp hours, and it works out to about 28 kilowatt hours. That's a lot. That's a lot for a tiny little cabin like this. And remember what I said about only using 50% of your batteries? So really I only have 14 kilowatt hours usable, which is still pretty good. What can I do with 14 kilowatt hours? I can do a lot of stuff. I can run let's take something like my coffee maker. My coffee maker it runs 1,000 watts. So if I ran my coffee maker straight for 14 hours, that would bring my battery bank down to about half. I'm not going to run my coffee pot for 14 straight hours. And remember I said my batteries are a bit damaged, so I'm probably not getting 28 kilowatt hours out of them. I don't know how much I'm getting. Certainly more than I need as it is. So my panels have a potential of a little over 2 kilowatts output. my batteries have 600 amp, about 28 kilowatt hours of power that can be stored in there, and that's kind of a loosey-goosey number too, because the faster you use your power, the faster your batteries drain, and they give you a rating. Say, if you deplete your batteries over a certain time period, this is how many amp hours you'll get out. If you do it a lot shorter, like half that time period, then you're only going to get this much out of them. So it's kind of a sliding scale. If you're running just a low wattage thing, you know, you're going to get a lot more life out of your batteries than if you ran high wattage things all day long. Does that make sense? I don't know. And then my inverter is a 5,000 watt inverter. So potentially at 120 volts, I'd have to do the math, but that's a lot of wattage you can get out of that. However, I'm going directly into a breaker box inside, and each one of those breakers is 15 amps. So I can get a maximum of 15 amps out of any one circuit. And if you do the math, 120 times 15, you know, I can run 1800 watts. Anything that up to 1800 watts at any time. What would that be? I don't know what runs 1800 watts. Certainly nothing that I have. My stove doesn't run 1800 watts. You know, you can get 1500 watt microwaves. I'm not sure what my miter saw uses, but then my miter saw has no problem running on a 15 amp circuit. So anyway, that should give you a good idea of how much power I have. When you think about it, you know, 2,000 watts of panels, and my kitchen lights are 9 watts each. You know, my TV runs at about 100 watts at any given time. My computer uses maybe 150 watts. Those are the kinds of things that run for any period of time. Like the high wattage things, like the coffee maker, only runs for a few minutes, so I'm not too worried about that. Anyway, that should cover it. Yeah. So guys, that's my solar power system. If you have any questions, please let me know. I should probably add a disclaimer that while I worked in the solar power industry for a number of years, and I know a lot about it, I'm not an expert. Certainly not an expert on your system, and every system's different. Every system is unique. Hopefully you know a little bit more now, and you can make that first call with a little more knowledge, but you should talk to a professional solar installer. If you're in Ontario, I can help you out. My business partner is still in the business, still installing solar power systems. They install great systems at good prices. And no, I'm not being paid for this, by the way. I just know. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. If I've missed anything and you need me to go over it again, I'd be happy to, because I wouldn't be surprised if I did miss something. Anyway, it's a beautiful day here at Raspberry Rock, and I'm loving it, and live streaming tonight. Hope to see you there, even though this video will be online after that. Yeah. If you enjoyed this video, please click like below, or click the subscribe button, because I do lots of videos here at Raspberry Rock, and it's a beautiful area, and lots of projects around the cabin. Hiking with the dogs, I do craft beer reviews and such like that. It's a lot of fun. So join along with me as I make a fool of myself. Yeah. Shit. Never mind.